introduction, could you please give us a very brief overview of your current professional interests? Let's start with Steven. Just very brief, just give us some introduction. Who you are, what you're doing. Mm-hmm.
I'm Stephen Reedboard. I'm an adult psychiatrist in private practice. I have a solo private practice in San Francisco. I've been in private practice since about 1995. Prior to that, I did some other things in psychiatry. My practice is mostly psychotherapy, although I do some medication management too. I also teach at a local medical center here, California Pacific Medical Center, where I've been for a number of years on the teaching faculty. And I've taught a number of things in psychiatry, including psychotherapy, outpatient evaluation, psychiatric ethics, and a number of other things.
Perfect. Let's move forward. What about you, Sami? Dr. Sami?
I'm an inpatient psychiatrist at Adventist Health at the Vallejo campus. I've been working there for about 8 years. Before that, I worked for Kaiser for a number of years. And I think you chose me because I also write software. I've written some software for the FreeBSD operating system, specifically some cybersecurity software. And so that's, you wanted me to bring a sort of a unique perspective to sort of the
yes, absolutely. Yes,
the nexus between psychiatry and the space.
Technology development. Thank you so much. Yes, that's great. Let's move forward to Rebecca. Just very
Sure. Yeah, feel free to call me Rebecca. I graduated residency in 2020 and have been practicing with a license like throughout residency in various modalities and areas of interest. I would say the main ones are trauma related, interpersonal trauma. So what a human may do to another human. Also neurodevelopmental divergencies. So like ADHD mostly. And right now I am on, so I worked throughout the pandemic. It was, a trying time for us all. I took some time off and now I'm kind of slowly reintegrating back into the workforce. I kind of like to do a hybrid of both seeing my own patients, having my own patient panel, but also doing sort of collegial leadership, collaborative work. So currently, right now I'm technically the associate medical director. I was a medical director of Silicon Valley TMS before I took some time. So not quite sure the next sort of path that I'll go down, but it's a combination of several things. So thank you for having me here, and I'm excited to be a part of this.
Thank you so much. Move forward. The series of webinars dedicated to human wellness in digital space was organized in the scope of the promotional effort of the Human Brain Expo 2023. If you want to know more information, please visit the website humanbrainexpo.com. I would like to start with some statistics we have provided by Adult Prevalence of Mental Illness. And statistics tell us that more than 90% of adults are experiencing mental illness in the United States, equivalent to nearly 50 million Americans. And also some data provided by National Alliance on Mental Illness 2020 tells us that more than 3 million people had very serious thoughts of suicide. And the main reasons of those sad data, basically COVID. So the first question I would like to start with, this is a little bit statistic from McKinsey. They're providing us like world view of the situation, and they're saying that almost in every single country they experience same situation. So there is mental health issue pretty much everywhere. And the question is, what do you think? My first question is, what do you think about the statistics? It's one thing. Another thing is, do you experience any significant changes in your practices, and how did you adjust your practices to the COVID needs? And did you have some real serious issues in your practice due to the COVID? Who wanna start? Who would like to start? Let's go, Steven. Steven, let's go. Yeah.
All about the statistics. When you see really big percentages like 20, 30, 40, 50% mental illness, you have to be clear that much of that is mild. The amount of severe mental illness is more like 5%, like your first slide showed. And a lot of people with mild depression and anxiety don't seek professional help. And so I think later we'll be talking about devices like smartphones and smartwatches and things like that give feedback to individuals without really any professional intervention. But it is a big issue about the rates of mental illness and mental distress in our society. So that's certainly true. In terms of my practice, well, my practice didn't include any remote treatment up before the pandemic. Certainly it was in the news and I was reading about it. And as a matter of fact, I was a bit of a contrarian. I was kind of against it before the pandemic, but then everyone had to use remote treatment if they were going to stay in practice for a while. So it changed my practice quite a lot. I saw patients only virtually using video conferencing software. We can talk about the different platforms if you want. And it was always my hope to go back to the way things were before. But as it turns out, even though I can see patients in the office now, it's about 60% in person and about 40% virtual. So it is adjusted, it has changed my practice a lot.
So you're like 40% of your patients, you are basically practicing telemedicine. You're talking with them online. No, perfect. What about you guys? Who want to talk? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of jumping into a pool of cold water. It was sort of all of a sudden you had to work primarily through telepsychiatry and use the computer to talk to your patients, and it was a very different experience. I think it was different for the treater and also the patients. I think it was difficult adjusting to that.
What about patients? I mean, are they like usually willing to talk via phones, via other media, or they prefer what they're saying? Do they prefer to talk in person, or do they prefer to talk via?
So I actually
go ahead.
Was required in training. I was required in training to do telehealth and telepsych before the pandemic because one of the attendings, Dr. Yelowitz, he's from like New Zealand. He was a pioneer in that prior to the pandemic, and so we were required to have at least 2 patients, I believe, who were doing fully remote psychiatry. I actually kind of circumvented that because I didn't like it. And then when the pandemic hit, I was like, oh, I should have learned that when I was supposed to. But basically, I don't know, like we're an adaptable species, as anything that survives. And so when you're put under certain pressures in your environment and you need certain resources and things to be met, you do what you need to do. And so I would say working in the middle of San Francisco and having people commute in from, for their jobs before they couldn't come in physically to get treatment, or it was very difficult, especially if they had 2 young children, for example, that had to get to schools and to soccer practice, and high octane careers. And so, now they can do, telepsych remotely. And so it really opened the doors for a lot of people. But, with anything like that, it comes with a cost. There's like the eye strain, and especially as the provider sitting behind the screen and staring at a screen all day, there's that adjustment too. So I would say patients, from my experience, got really used to, and my colleagues themselves also got used to the convenience of telemedicine, telepsych. And I think it's obviously here to stay for a long time, and some people will only do that, both as patients and providers.
Okay. I think the second question, my second question was actually dedicated to like your implementation. I think you already covered it up pretty well, but I would like to a little bit broader the like to make the question broader, because I saw on for example, I saw on the Stevens website that you're actually using some software to for testing clients. I mean, for evaluating their condition. So the second question is actually about the actually prescription and recommendations. So currently there are so many different digital health therapeutic devices available for people with actual psychiatric conditions and just for the general population. And my question is, do you actually prescribe like officially certain digital therapeutics, or you just give them like, just recommend some solutions? Steve, can you answer this question?
Prescribe or recommend any FDA cleared digital solutions. Those would be actual medical devices. In the course of my work with patients who are depressed or anxious, I'll frequently, there's a term nowadays called integrative psychiatry, which usually means people who are including nutrition and meditation and other sorts of things in treatment. I do that a little bit. I don't exactly call myself an integrative psychiatrist, but I encourage people to take yoga classes, to learn mindfulness meditation, things like that. And certainly, as I mentioned before, we have devices now which can be very helpful. There are meditative apps on phones. There are smartwatches. I recently got one myself, and it makes me more enthusiastic about exercising. There's ways in which our technology really promotes the sorts of things we were always promoting all along anyway, like good nutrition and exercise and getting good sleep. Now we can monitor our sleep with our devices. So I don't prescribe anything that's FDA cleared, because those would be medical devices, but I do advise patients to use these kinds of tools if it helps them live healthier lives.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I really prescribe any digital tools, primarily just medications. I think the whole digital realm is sort of in its infancy. I think people are still struggling with digital devices and being able to appropriately use digital devices as tools. Just like a crutch. A crutch is something that's, if used correctly, is designed to make your leg stronger. But if used incorrectly, can lead to your leg becoming weaker. And if you can even use a crutch in such a way that you hurt yourself. You can damage the nerves in your armpit if you're sort of leaning on the crutch in the incorrect way. So I think in that sense, people need to learn to use digital devices not as a crutch but as a tool.
Yeah, I would say. Sorry. I would say to kind of. Yeah, I would agree with what both other speakers have mentioned. I do lightly recommend things. I'm careful with sleep, because I think we're still have a lot of things that we don't quite agree on when it comes to how to improve sleep and like tracking sleep hours and stuff. Sometimes it can make it worse, but things like ADHD and like keeping track of things. So like there's certain apps that help you build skills and tools with being more organized and functional, both at home and in the workplace. Same with like for women in their menstrual cycle and knowing how their mental health symptoms sometimes correlate with where they are in their cycle. So there's really good apps like Flow that can help with that. So caution, right? So, you know, a lot of people have really taken to TikTok and social media platforms to kind of feel connected and network with other people that may identify with a diagnosis such as ADHD. And there's obviously some positives, but there's some very obvious, you know, risks with that as well, which a lot of studies are coming out with now, right? Like you get on TikTok, you say, do I have ADHD? What's ADHD? And now all of a sudden you have ADHD, or you're convinced you do. And there's sometimes that is true, and sometimes it does facilitate or becomes a catalyst to getting care and treatment and advocacy. But there's obviously a lot of potential downsides, and so we're really looking at that now in research. I think that research in that is really fascinating, and also, you know, who knows what we'll see in years from now. But I agree in that caution when you recommend something like that, because the recommendation and especially the prescription holds a lot of power for a lot of people, and you could easily do more harm than good in that. So vet those sources first, obviously.
Comment on that?
Go ahead.
You mentioned the screening tool I have on my website, and I think the distinction is that it's a screening tool. It's not a diagnostic tool, you know, and actually it's really more or less something we can discuss when the patient comes in. It's not something I would
do you
base.
consider, I mean, do you making any conclusions? Do you consider the information you're getting from those
Consider the
tools?
information in the sense that I bring it up when I meet with the patient. If I see that they've endorsed many symptoms of depression, I'll talk to them about that. But I think there's a difference between doing that and relying on a screening tool diagnostically, which I think is a mistake. People look online for the signs and symptoms of ADHD or autism or other things, and then they decide they have that problem because they checked off 10 things on a questionnaire online, and that's not how we diagnose things. And so there's a little knowledge can be dangerous, right?
Yeah.
That's
Okay,
nice.
let's move forward because we have like very short amount of time left. Okay, so I really want to bring up the case, the pilot study provided by Novartis. What Novartis found, they basically acquired the right to an app for schizophrenia that had complete 2 successful but uncontrolled pilot studies demonstrating initial efficiency for improving symptoms. However, when Novartis tested a modified version of the app in a larger study that included a digital placebo, they found no difference between the study arms. Many digital health apps today are complex multimodal interventions, and identifying the active ingredients, let alone improving control group, remains challenging. Still, identified active ingredients and their mechanism of action is important for designing studies that can evaluate digital products. Why I actually really wanted to bring this information up, because I think it's fascinating. So the thing is, I did a lot of like research. What I figured out that study that actually we can find online, they are not actually that reliable and trustworthy, because the thing is, the whole idea of designing study for the digital intervention is still under question, because there are lots of things like digital placebo, like digital literacy, and etc., that actually intervene, that actually doesn't allow us to provide valuable information regarding the efficiency of the certain digital tools. Okay, what do you think about the studies, the actual results that published everywhere, and everybody is like very excited about the efficiency of those digital tools? Can you? I know that Steven is actually in this very active in terms of like academia. You probably can you give us a little bit, a few comments regarding the designing of the studies, digital tools for the digital tools?
I'm not familiar with all of the digital studies, of course. There's quite a lot of them, but part of the problem is the mix is what we would call political science, right? There's science and there's how it's used. A lot of this is in the service of promoting a new product. And sometimes it's studies with a small sample, or they don't observe the subjects long enough to really know if there's relapse or how long the symptoms have changed. And also, as you're pointing out with this example, it depends on what you're using as a control, right? If the control is a wait list, which is often what it is, that is, you just tell some of the subjects to wait for treatment, almost anything is better than just waiting. And so you can show that your new product is much better, it works compared to just waiting. But the question really is how it compares to other things we already have that we know works. And, a digital placebo effect, I hadn't actually heard that term before, but that's a great term for it. When you get a new device or a new app, you believe in it and you think it's great and it's and you like it. And, I like my new smartwatch. I think it's wonderful. I don't know how much it really helps, but I like to think that it does. And I think that's something that's true with a lot of technology. We have to compare it. We have to see what the active ingredient is, as you say here. We don't really know what it is about these that help. If it's just advice, you can get that from a book or a friend. If it's advice on your app, is that better? So that's the kind of questions that come up for me when it comes to the research.
What about Samismo as the savviest of us in terms of digital tools? Dr. Sami?
Yeah, I think as society needs to learn how to use these tools. For example, if you're in the car and your watch is telling you to move more, obviously you don't want to move more. It would be dangerous. So and I think the kids are slowly learning that aspect of the advice that's given to them by digital devices as sort of something that's simplistic and something to take note of, but not necessarily follow at all times.
Yeah, I would so 2 points. One about the digital placebo. That was a first for me as well, but I love that. It's interesting. I agree. So in both at UC Davis and at UCSF, they have these really good programs where if you have early onset psychosis and it's identified, then they have these really good wraparound programs where you and your family, or if your family's supportive and you have the diagnosis, can get the treatment both in a functional standpoint, pharmacological, therapy, group therapy, all the things. And if you go through the program, the chances of the prognosis in the long run is usually much better than had you maybe not got that sort of support early on, because every time you have like a psychotic episode, it's kind of like a hit to your brain, not in a good way. And so I would be curious to integrate something like that into a program like that, the wraparound programs. I would be suspicious of just using a digital app as treatment, for someone with a severe mental illness, just schizophrenia. But I know that they are already using some of those apps because you have to do a lot of measurements to see, is there progress? Is there some remission of the symptoms, those sort of things. So that is an area where they could definitely use digital platform support that could be helpful in their treatments.
Okay, Dr. Rebecca actually brought up very very important question about the safety, security of usage. And Dr. Sami too, he mentioned that you cannot get up on the recommendation of your app to move when you're driving a car, which is absolutely violent thing to ask. In terms of privacy and security, there's actually a 2021 review of more than 20,000 apps in the medical and health and fitness category in the Google App Store found that 28% offered absolutely no privacy policy, and 88% include code that could potentially collect user data. So let's put it this way, 88% included code that could potentially collect user data, meaning that pretty much all of them watching after us and collecting data about our behavior, about our responses, about the way we type, about the application we're using. It's kind of scary. Honestly, it's scary for me. I'm trying to avoid any applications. I'm not using much. But it's the question of privacy. It's very, very high. So what do you think about it, and how that can actually enter in and hurt the whole idea of psychiatry and mental wellness of people who are using it? Then, Dr. Sami?
What was the question again?
The question, we're talking about 88% applications that actually collect data from users. The question is, what can we do? What can we do to provide, what kind of steps on our end as a user, and what kind of steps you can recommend, implement at your practice to basically provide, to improve security of patients? For example, do you give any recommendations? Like, do you talk about it with your patients about it? You know, do you have any extra steps, like in your head, is currently already implemented in your practice, that would provide a tiny little bit, you know, drop of the feel of security for patients?
Yeah, I have had patients who were concerned about the video connection, and if someone could be watching them, or could be eavesdropping, or and I have had patients bring up concerns that they were worried about their private information, and I tell them that that I'm taking all the precautions that I can take. That all of my computers are behind a firewall, and that I've taken every measure possible to protect their user information. Everything is encrypted, multi-factor authentication used, and that their information is important to me as something that needs to be kept private. Certainly Google and different companies, they do collect various types of information, which can be sensitive if used in the way that they in the way that they collect it. They don't necessarily collect like medical records or notes, or even words, but sort of a lot of metadata that can be used to make inferences about their psychological state. There are steps that they can take to protect themselves from companies gathering that data. Certainly.
And what steps have we supposed to do to avoid collection of the data after us? What would you recommend?
Well, many of these companies provide avenues for protecting your information. There are usually settings that you can change in various apps, and through the Google website or the Apple website, that allow you to opt out of collecting that information. Now, whether or not the companies are respecting your preferences is something else to consider, but I think that is certainly something that lawmakers are looking into right now, at least. For a while, I think these companies were flying under the radar, but I think.
So you think that the whole situation with the safety, it's healthy, it's good for our mental health? I mean, overall, you think it's healthy to use those applications, right?
I think that people need to realize that that these are tools, and that they need to be used appropriately, and if used incorrectly, can be dangerous.
How dangerous? I mean, what when you're talking about dangerous, what does it mean? Can it be like certain, understanding well-being? You can actually get some. I think you can get really some symptoms of, if someone. Did you see the advertisement of Google when a person trying to hide from Google following? Did you see this ad? I mean, we can get the paranoia thinking about, who's watching after us and who's like actually tracking the information after us. I think it's going to be, it's not good in terms of our like mental security. Like, do you think it's healthy? Like in general, the bottom line is it's healthy to use it.
I think there's a couple of conversations we can have about this. One of them being, I mean, we look at different types of mental health afflictions, so to speak, such as paranoia, or, in schizophrenia, you can get a symptom of paranoia. And so if you're recording a person, or if you're on a video with a person who is predisposed to having anxieties around that, you're kind of taking a greater risk, right? As opposed to seeing them in person, seeing them, face to face. A lot of delusional content for someone with a primary thought disorder or a psychotic disorder is often around being recorded, being listened to, having a chip implanted device into their body. So this whole digital age that intersects with a loaded predisposition for paranoid ideas and delusions, it's easy to have that kind of get away from you in the treatment. So, and you also look at anxieties just in general. Someone with a really high anxiety disorder or disposition, and there's also things about, well, what if my information gets out? What if my work can hear this? So there's a lot of different conversations around that. There's the digital age opens up a lot of opportunities, but you have to be very careful. It can get away from you really quickly. But to your point, or some of the points just made, as there's been all these acquisitions by major tech companies of mental health entities, there's a question around, well, what about the information they're acquiring as well, in regards to someone's medical history, all of their medical history, let alone mental health. What are they doing to protect that, right? As I don't know if you're familiar with like One Medical, just getting, there's a lot of examples, especially in this era, post-COVID or whatever we're in right now, where there's this opportunity to acquire companies, how much caution and safety is being put into protecting the individuals and their rights to their privacy around their own healthcare.
Yeah.
I'm not hearing you.
We're not here. But we can't hear you. Yeah.
Oh, my question was to Steven, Dr. Steven, because he didn't respond to this question. Do you actually like educate your patients about it? Like, do you extra precautions? Do you have extra step implemented in your practice to provide a little bit more security to your patients?
Really the only tech I use regularly is video conferencing, and I have made it a point to use HIPAA compliant platforms. There's some controversy about the security of things like FaceTime, although it seems like actually it's just as secure as the HIPAA compliant ones from what I've read. Maybe Sammy can speak to that. I use Zoom, which is already encrypted even in its regular form, but if you pay a little extra, you get a business associate agreement, which makes it officially HIPAA compliant. So I do that. There was another company called Doxy.me, which I used for a long time, which was also HIPAA compliant with a business associate agreement. So, so I take care like that. Many of my patients are pretty tech savvy already, so I don't need to instruct them very much. But I just like to kind of echo what the other speakers have said, that you know, there's a saying that if the service is free, then you're the product. You know, selling your data is one of the ways that these companies make money. So it's something to be careful about. And the only other thing I'll say is that long before this current era, when I was in training, we had a video camera in the emergency room at the Veterans Hospital, so that when we interviewed patients, the security people could see if there was trouble. And the paranoid patients would always be paranoid about the camera. They would always say, "Who's watching me?" And they were right, of course. There were people watching them. But it didn't make the interview any easier. It made it harder because they realized that they were being observed electronically. So certainly if somebody's paranoid already, it's going to be more difficult with electronic monitoring.
You know, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That was it.
Okay. So you brought up actually a very good question about the, you know, the results, the consequences we're getting from the usage of those, you know, brand new digital devices. You know, the next question I would like to ask you is, did you notice any specific symptoms, thought patterns, changes in the thought patterns that actually associated with the downside of social media usage and usage of the digital tools? So do we have currently, I know that it's a very, very kind of, you know, maybe strange question to ask, but I know that you've been in the area in psychiatry for a long, long time. Could you please tell us, is there any specific thought patterns, specific symptoms that associated with extensive usage of a social media? I mean, is there any changes you noticed? And can you tell, does this person using way too much over digital tools, and does it hurt or not? Can you please comment on it?
Me?
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
No. It would be very hard to ascribe anything to one particular thing. You know, we're living in a digital age. It's not just social media, but a lot of it is. There's a couple things that come to mind. The first is that people diagnose themselves a lot. And that isn't only social media, that's also other media, I guess. Many people call me already sure they have adult ADHD, and they really want me to confirm it. And I don't even really like treating ADHD for that reason, because I have to convince so many people they don't have something they think they have, which is the opposite of the way I was trained. Usually I have to convince people that they do have something they don't think they have. So it's made it kind of difficult. Also, because I work in San Francisco, I've had a patient or two who really plan to make it big in the tech industry. And some of them do, one or two I've had where they were really successful. But many people are discouraged and heartbroken when they have these wonderful ideas for a new killer app and it doesn't work out. So, you know, the age we live in is kind of a gold rush of apps and social media and becoming an influencer and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, just like the rest of the entertainment industry, most people don't succeed at that.
Yeah, I treat some teenagers and some kids here and there, especially during the pandemic when access was limited for those groups. But I mostly talk to parents about their kids and their kids' depression or what looked like depression and struggles, especially in the teenage years, and kind of on their own. Actually, I usually don't tell the parents how to be parents to a specific degree, and they'll take away the social media. You know, the kids will be depressed or maybe they'll act out, and so they'll take away social media. And then the one thing, or what I've heard resoundingly from parents that do that, is that their kids are happier. And so they kind of are slow to reintegrate, if at all, their access to social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all the things. And so I'm not saying that they're bad. I don't like to call most things good and bad, but there is something to be said for a kid who, spends a lot of their time, hunched over looking at, this sort of filtered, placated or manufactured, profiles of their peers. And that's just not human. That's just not what we are. I mean, we have flaws and we have vulnerabilities, and we can manipulate a lot through a social media platform, hence an influencer on Instagram, but that's just not real life. I mean, I grew up when looking at Cosmo when my mom took me to check out groceries at the local grocery. It's like there's airbrushed models on the front page, and that is what it is. But it has an influence on like a growing mind on like, what does it mean to come on to your own? What does it mean to individualize as an adult? And you have sort of these false representations of the human body, the human psyche, relationships, things like that. And it's just, there's a lot of areas, there's a lot of room for things to go awry. So you just got to be, careful with how much I think we allow our youth to be locked into just that on their day to day. Social media.
I mean, theoretically, something like TikTok that rapidly scrolls through short videos, which kind of reminds me of Baby Einstein, which was something that was able to sort of grab the kids' attention by using very short clips or rapid successions of short clips, which would theoretically sort of rob the baby or rob the young person of the ability to sustain attention, because they're never, they're not having to focus on something that's quiet or that requires a lot of attention. That's theoretically, but I haven't really seen sort of a pandemic of ADHD coming into the office, though. I mean, which is what you would expect, right? If there was something very dramatic, if the effect was dramatic, you would expect, sort of there to be a large increase in people coming in with ADHD, but I haven't really seen that.
I've seen it. I mean, I don't know. I haven't been practicing super long, but I would say, I mean, I have my colleagues too. It's like every referral, ADHD, like every other referral and more. But I think it also depends on, the area that you're practicing in and what demographics, are selected too. I think there's probably other reasons for that, but I had a friend actually tell me that she thinks someone gave her ADHD because they're so ADHD. I don't know. It just, I do think, like you said, that the TikTok algorithm, how it's just a short clip and how it hits those dopamine receptors, and then you get to the next one, and then it's just, it's a slippery slope. I think that is a good point.
Well, I mean, there is a nationwide shortage of Adderall. But I wasn't sure if they weren't making it enough, or whether it was being prescribed more.
Yeah.
The pandemic of ADHD. Yeah.
So is it understood, because I'm not like professional in this, is it understood ADHD basically is the main result of the usage of social media, right?
I don't think that's been established, actually. No.
But still, we were
kind of joking about,
yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly, from my perspective as a marketer, I mean, I've been using a lot of like media, and then just so people that time reading because it requires a lot of attention. But people for them, it's a lot easier to watch, you know, a few seconds talk or whatever. For them, I get like easily few hundreds of you know, people who actually can watch, but who actually can read, it's a lot less. You know, it's probably, you know, 10% or so, maybe less. Okay, it's a very interesting question.
ADHD is supposed to be diagnosed. You're supposed to have symptoms before age 12. So people who come in with the so-called adult ADHD needs to have a history of this from childhood in order for it to really be a diagnosis.
Yeah, that's good to know. That's good to know. You know, not because we don't have much time left, just a few minutes left. So I was I'm actually digital phenotyping. What is digital phenotyping? Digital phenotyping aims to detect and categorize an individual's behavior, activities, interests, and psychological features. Because for now we have so many applications and digital tools, and we can even if we have full control of our security, and we're not the devices don't know that that's actually we who are acting in this way, but still they have lots of information about the individuals, and that's called digital phenotyping. So it's basically behavioral data. And my question is, can this behavioral data from digital tools can be useful in actual practices, like to diagnose diseases, or for example to help out with something, or people who have, for example, addictions, all sort of addiction, can it help to manage their condition? Can it be helpful? The question is, can digital phenotyping can actually be helpful in the real practice?
I think it can, as a tool, digital as a tool for data to, as I was saying, people can monitor their own sleep and activity and their exercise levels and things like that. That's essentially that. Also, just how much they move around, and you know, as a gauge of their own improvement from depression or how they're managing their anxiety. I think it can be useful, but it's not an end in itself. It's just a means to an end. It's data that you can then use in a treatment setting.
Okay, so basically it's a tool. It's basically provide you data. You will not. Okay, I got it. Okay,
I think it can provide a few more data points when used in combination with other data points. Yeah, I think it could be useful.
I've noticed the most is that my patients will buy things on Instagram. Like so it shows sort of the impulse behavior, like maybe they're trying to budget, and at night they'll be home from work, they're tired, and like they'll see this bracelet on Instagram and they'll buy it and they'll regret it the next day. You know, so it becomes a tool for practicing like sort of self-control and, you know, self-imposed limits on, you know, how do you want to see the long game, you know, instead of the short term, you know, relief of whatever mental discomfort you're having at that time at the end of the day. So, I mean, there's something to be said for that too, but that gets into the whole, like, you know, using the algorithms to see what you're interested in and kind of marketing, you know, based on that too.
So it's a really good tool, but you will never you will never completely rely on it. You will use other you know, tools, other ways of you know, for diagnosis, for like to make some conclusions regarding the situation, right?
Yeah, one thing here, because I see about the substance use. So one medication we sometimes use for substance use disorders is naltrexone, which helps with some of the impulsivity around substance use. So, you know, I can see how, I don't know much about this, but how like you can maybe use sort of that impulsivity through digital to kind of train against that.
Okay, we have, actually, I want to ask, maybe some of our attendees have question, because we don't have that much time left. Guys, if you have a question, please raise your hand, or you can actually type your question and Q&A section. It's available for all of you. If you have a question for our speakers. Just wait a few seconds. Okay, I think the last question I would like to actually bring up and discuss, it's actually whole body approach, because I know all of you, I mean, some of you, Dr. Steven, Dr. Rebecca, for sure, they support this approach. So the whole movement, there is a huge movement actually in psychiatry, as I understood, according to my knowledge, that actually promote of the whole person approach. And meaning that usually any mental always associated with the some physical symptoms. And the question is how like extensive usage of digital tools can not change or influence the idea of whole person movement approach. Dr. Rebecca, can you give us a little your feedback, because I know it was a big part of your recent research.
Yeah, I think that it can kind of go either way, and so trying to keep in mind the whole body. So you mentioned sort of the physical manifestation maybe of psychological states, and so we see that in things like when someone's under a lot of stress, maybe they're still pushing themselves despite this, maybe they're still pushing themselves towards that stressor even though it's causing them a lot of stress. Oftentimes the body will shut it down for you. So there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. It's a very famous trauma focused book that is used in training and with patients to help understand trauma. And just the digital side of things is that while you can fragment the body and the mind with things like digital photography and things like that, you can also try to reintegrate things. Like I was saying, for women's mental health, maybe they have premenstrual dysphoric disorder where they get a lot of mood symptoms and such before their menses. You can incorporate the digital side of things like the app like Flow, where it helps to coach you along the way what could be contributing to some of the symptoms that you're experiencing. So I think it can be used both for and against the whole body approach. And so just being mindful of, whether that's happening or not, I think is important.
That because you were no? Dr. Steven, do you have something to add?
Yeah. Well, I pretty much agree. Digital tools can bring you closer to a human experience or further away. When we couldn't see people in person, I saw them on video, and that was the next best thing. And it was a lot better than not seeing them. So it was certainly a very useful tool that way. I think that when human interactions are replaced by digital interactions, that's a negative. I think that can be something that gets in the way. So, for example, there are some AI chat bots that sort of provide something that they call therapy. I would be a little skeptical that that's really therapy because it's not a human connection. You know, therapy by text message, I think, is something which may not really be called therapy, in my opinion. So there are some efforts to bring mental health care without the human component, it seems, or with less of the human component, and I think that's a problem. But certainly we've talked already this hour about ways that you can use digital tools and keep the human component, and I think that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
That's amazing approach. I agree with this approach. Just to let you know, I'm not professional, but still, I believe in I believe in the same. Okay, Dr. Sami, want to add something?
I agree with the other two speakers. I mean, yeah, you know, as always, you know, a tool is, you know, sort of designed to strengthen, augment, not to replace or, you know,
Yes.
so change the nature of.
Yes. The bottom line is that the human connection, the human interaction, actually is extremely important for the mental wellness, right? Yes, and there is no way only digital tool actually can help. You always can seek and look for the actual human interaction, and you have to see professionals from the area to be sure that you're on the right track, right? Because only digital tools can be dangerous, as we understood. Usage only digital tools can be dangerous for your mental wellness. It's one thing I think we can conclude after the conversation. And a second thing, it's you cannot exclude human interaction. Never. And currently available digital tools, they can be used as a tools, it's a provider of extra information, or it can help you in terms of like reaching out professionals, but it cannot be used just by itself and cannot treat by itself, right? Do you agree with this conclusion?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm reminded of Elon Musk's AI bot, which after scouring the internet and learning to be human, became an extremely abusive and foul language using bot, as I understand.
Yeah, you need that human interaction to keep things civil and human.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. For on this, with this, I think it's a good conclusion and good. How can I say good conclusions for the webinar, and we are finishing up now because it's a time. So I really want to say thank you to Dr. Steven, Dr. Sami, for being with us. I think we covered a lot of very interesting and actual subject matter today. So thank you so much for being with us, sharing your perspective and point. I hope it will be very useful for our current attendees and other attendees who will be able to see our webinar on YouTube, because the record will be available online. Thank you so much and have the wonderful rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.